Welcome once again to Why Should We Care About the Indo-Pacific, brought to you by IEJ Media and sponsored by the Bauer Group Asia. We will tell you more about them in due course. I am Ray Powell. I'm the former military officer. I'm the good-looking one. That's Jim Caruso. He's the former diplomat. He's all right. Jim, when we were looking out at what was going to happen sort of after the inauguration of Donald J. Trump, I did not have USAID anywhere on my bingo card.
Well, that shows you're not thinking right because, USAID, and we have a guest today who will explain what they do, does not really have a domestic constituency, and that makes it ripe for the plucking. To describe the plucking, we are very fortunate to have Michael Schiffer, who until a few days ago was the Deputy Administrator of USAID, that's U.S. Agency for International Development. And before that, he had a career in Washington on the Senate Foreign Relations Defense Committee. Anyway, and worked for...
I was on foreign relations.
Was at the Pentagon. So he knows Washington. He knows how things work. So we're really happy to have Michael on. I used to deal with him when I was at State, where he tried to keep me in line. Anyway, Michael, welcome. Glad to have you on. We're going to go for the first question. Why should we Americans or anyone in the world care about USAID, whether it exists or not?
It is a great and a very fair question. I think there are sort of three dimensions of it. First, at the end of the day, what USAID does may be charitable, but it's not charity. This is about American foreign policy. This is about American security. This is about how we show up around the world. And our foreign assistance is in, many significant respects. It is the ground game for American national security policy. And being able to knit together defense, development, and diplomacy is essential if we're going to be successful around the world. Secondly, there is a moral piece of this. And I don't mean, altruistically moral in that sense. But what USAID does, our foreign assistance work, is actually what makes America exceptional. It's what makes America great. It is the secret sauce for the success of our foreign policy. And the third piece, I'm happy to unlock that and unpack that a little bit more as you want. The third piece, is the part that I think you nodded to there, Jim, which is, it is my belief that the incoming administration has chosen USAID, a small agency without, as you said, a particularly powerful domestic constituency, to curb-stomp and to try to curb-stomp it to death as a way to send a message to the rest of the federal bureaucracy. Right? This is, as our friends in Beijing would say, this is, you kill the chicken to scare the monkey. And also to test their proposition and their belief about where the balance should be set between the president and Congress. What is legal? What is constitutional? And so I think there are much bigger issues that are at play here as well.
Well, thanks for that good introduction, Michael. I want to kind of go back and sort of set the stage for all of this because I would like to understand better myself. Where did USAID come from? Why does it exist in the first place? And how has its role evolved since its inception?
Great question, and one that I think is particularly important in 2025 as we're thinking about what this new era of great power strategic competition means for the United States. And what are the legitimate questions? And I think there are a lot of legitimate questions that the Trump administration has raised about how and whether you realign USAID and state and the other instruments of our national security policy. USAID was first stood up in 1961 by President Kennedy, right? So very much in a Cold War context. Growing out of the success and recognizing the success that we had with the Marshall Plan in rebuilding Europe as part of our, again, both there was a charitable aspect, but there was also a very hard-nosed realpolitik aspect as we considered what the challenge was that we faced from the Soviet Union. And so USAID was created at that point as a fit-for-purpose foreign assistance agency for the U.S. In a Cold War context, and recognizing that there are things that development specialists do that diplomats don't, and that our Defense Department doesn't. The technical expertise that engineers and doctors, for example, can bring to bear to help build resilient societies and to help build strong partnerships. The expertise that economists can bring to bear that USAID has and developed. The agency was then put into statute in 1998, and there have been tweaks to it over the years since 1961, as we've gone from Cold War to post-Cold War to whatever it is that we have now. I mean, I'm comfortable with this new era of great power strategic competition, but others have different views as to how they would characterize where the world is in 2025. And so AID, over the years, has undergone a number of different reorganizations and realignments as it's built out its Bureau of Humanitarian Affairs that does humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, to global health bureaus, a variety of different regional bureaus, and I had the honor of heading up our Asia Bureau for the past several years, and has built expertise for building strong, resilient civil societies, helping journalists as they look to do their work, economic growth partnerships, whether it's building roads and infrastructure or building safe, reliable, and resilient digital ecosystems. All of that, has been part of the USAID mandate and growth and development over the years.
So one of the critiques, Michael, from Musk and Trump has been that there's no control or oversight of how USAID spends its budget. Now, you worked in Congress. Can you describe that?
Yeah, look, I can describe it from both sides of the equation, and that is it's simply untrue. For my bureau, for example, and I was not unusual, 90%, more than 90% of the funds that the Asia Bureau had to work with and the programs that we had to work with were congressionally directed. There were earmarks. And those earmarks were driven every bit as much by Republican members as Democratic members. So there was a high degree of congressional engagement and oversight. Every program that we moved forward with, we had to provide congressional notifications, do congressional briefings. And so Congress really did have, a strong hand, as it should, in shaping and driving what USAID did. And, beyond the congressional engagement, USAID, and I have to say, this drove me crazy sometimes when I was there, because I wanted to be able to go off and do my own stuff. But we always engage with our interagency partners at the State Department, at the National Security Council, with the Defense Department, and others for all of our work. And so the idea that USAID was sort of off doing its own thing without going through the State Department, which I might add, as Secretary Rubio well knows, had every dime that we spend has to go through the finance folks at state before we can disperse it. All of that was highly and tightly coordinated. I think there are lots of good arguments for how and why we need to think about, what would be appropriate for a realignment or reorganization of how we do foreign assistance. But it's not because USAID was doing its own thing without both state and national security council and congressional engagement, oversight, and guidance. That is just absolutely untrue.
So explain, just because this is now kind of the topic, right? That Marco Rubio is now the acting administrator of USAID, right? Or the acting director. And so USAID has a relationship with state that was changed, I believe, in the late 90s, right? And so can you explain, first of all, what was the previous relationship between AID and state? What changed, and why did that change?
So, I mean, as you may remember, in the late 1990s, we were at the end of history. And so there was a larger reorganization of U.S. foreign policy organizations. And so the U.S. Information Service and the Arms Control and Disarmament Agency, which were both previously independent agencies, were folded into the State Department. And there was a lot of discussion and debate about whether or not USAID, as an independent agency, should also be folded into the State Department. The deal that was struck at that time, and this was part of what led to that 1998 statutory construction that now makes USAID have a legal and statutory standing so that it can't simply be wished away by executive order. To make that deal possible and keep USAID independent, they set up a reporting mechanism so that USAID, for all of its funding and programmatic decisions, had to go into the F Bureau, the Foreign Assistance and Finance Bureau at State Department for approval before programs could be then kicked back out and run. And so that's
but you're saying I had that backwards. It wasn't that USAID was broken out partially from the State Department, but that actually was folded in partially to the State Department in the late 90s.
Correct. And there's some tension there, obviously, and has been for a number of years. USAID, as sort of human nature, doesn't like the idea of having to go to the State Department and say, hey, mother, may I? State Department obviously wants to be able to exercise, more control over USAID if it can, right? I mean, that's just sort of the nature of bureaucracies. But it's been a pretty functional and good relationship, and I would argue it's been a healthy relationship for USAID, because it does force very mission-driven people who are out there wanting to work on global health, for example, wanting to do humanitarian assistance for all the right reasons. It does force folks to go back and say, okay, how does this fit in with broader U.S. foreign policy and national security goals, right? We've got to make sure that is our first principle. And so I think it's actually worked fairly well to make sure that alignment has been there. Not perfectly, but fairly well. And that's not nothing.
So Secretary Rubio a few days ago cited USAID activities as, quote, conflicting, overlapping, and duplicative with state, and noted systems of processes often result in discord in foreign policy and foreign relations of the United States. So despite his being very supportive of AID when he was a senator, he had a road to Damascus moment to discover these problems. I just, rather than just comment on that, our Australian and UK allies did fold their assistance agencies back into their foreign relations agencies. So maybe you can comment about how that went and why it should or shouldn't be that case in the U.S.
Yeah, no. Look, one, as you offered, I would suggest that folks have a look at all of the earmarks and directions that Secretary Rubio provided for USAID when he was a senator, all of the letters that he wrote and statements that he made calling on USAID to take action on different issues, because he understood the capacity that USAID had to offer, and where, frankly, USAID as a development organization, as opposed to a diplomatic organization, had unique capabilities that it was able to offer. Now, are there areas where there is duplication and where we can and should be giving serious thought to how to gain additional efficiencies? Yes, without a doubt. And a sensible way to approach realignment would look at things, like, for example, I mentioned our Bureau of Humanitarian Assistance before. They have unique capabilities for disaster response that I think we as a nation would be ill-served if we get rid of them. On the other hand, are there areas where BHA and the State Department's Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration have programs that overlap that probably could be brought closer into alignment? Yes. Are there things that USAID does on the civil society, democracy, free press, rule of law front, labor rights, that overlap with some of the programs that the State Department, Bureau for Democracy, Rights, and Labor runs? Yes. Are there areas there that we can, benefit as a nation if we push them together and gain those efficiencies? Absolutely. And, frankly, I did not always make myself popular at USAID because I would heretically advocate for some of that when I was inside. But what's happening right now is throwing the baby out with the bathwater, maybe quite literally throwing the baby out with the bathwater in the case of some of our health and water and sanitation programs. We're not approaching this in a thoughtful way, as you mentioned, the Australians and the UK. The Canadians also, went through this process where, we're not approaching this in a thoughtful way, looking at what are the capacities that we want to maintain? Where are there efficiencies that can be gained by, combining the efforts of state and USAID, and not just state and USAID, right? There's the Trade Development Administration, there's the Development Finance Corporation, right, on the economic growth side. There's the Millennium Challenge Corporation, right? There are a number of different organizations, all work in this space that I would argue, sitting down and doing a bottom-up review and assessment. There's a strong logic of that. That is not what we're doing.
Let's take this back a step. What is the point of foreign aid from a national interest perspective? Why are the people who say, why are we giving these foreign countries money when we've got problems here in the United States? Why are they wrong?
No, look, I don't think they're wrong, because I think that is a very fair question. But I also think there are answers to the question. Look, and quite frankly, as I would go around, I mentioned sort of some of the water and sanitation work that we do. I always asked folks when I would go out to missions and I would sit down with our program folks, like, if we have people in Flint, Michigan that are facing problems with, water in their community, we've got to be able to explain why it makes sense for the United States to make this investment in Nepal or in Laos or wherever it might be. Well, we also have these challenges at home. So I think it is a very fair question. I think it is the right question. And I think it's, a question that, from my time up in Congress, that our elected representatives, of course, have to be able to ask and to hold USAID accountable for. But I would also offer, right, even from the most hard-nosed, narrowest national security perspective, the work that USAID does is essential for national security success. If you're, if you're Admiral Paparo at Indo-Pacific Command, and you're thinking about how do I set the theater? How do I set the theater so that I can be successful in putting in place the posture that I might need for a war fight? The work that USAID does, not that it's necessarily transactional, to build the partnerships in the Philippines, in Papua New Guinea, in other places where we need that access is essential. And there was a lot of work that we did over the past several years, hip to hip with the Department of Defense and with our combatant commands, to make sure, again, not that what we were doing was necessarily instrumental. There had to be a real development need, but to make sure that we were doing work that would create the space for sustainable posture and a sustainable military footprint. We did a lot of work in the Philippines, for example, to align USAID efforts with what the Department of Defense was doing with the enhanced defense access sites. Same in other places that I'll maybe not mention. We were very public about what we were doing with the EDCA facilities in the Philippines, and the Filipino government, wanted us to be doing that. And so I think all of that work is essential if you're going to be able to have the sort of posture that is going to be necessary for our success as we look at the challenges that we face.
Oh, sorry, but Jim, just really quick. So, I mean, we've got a lot of viewers in the Philippines. Should they be worried that right now, because of the pause in funding and staffing for USAID, that those projects around the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement sites, the EDCA sites, is going to be imperiled?
I would offer, and I don't offer this with any sense of joy or happiness, but absolutely. A number of those programs are currently on pause or have been turned off. The local communities are going to suffer the consequences of that, whether that is economic consequences, health consequences, educational consequences, and that is going to present a challenge. We may be in a good place right now with our relationship with the Philippines, but I think anybody that has tracked the history of U.S. presence and access in the Philippines over the past many decades knows that it goes up, it goes down, it goes up, it goes down. And I think it is profoundly in our national security interest to make sure that it is more up than down, and that there is a steady, predictable trajectory. Right? And for that, as I offered at the outset, USAID, our foreign assistance, our development assistance, is the ground game for U.S. foreign policy and for getting that right.
Well, let's get a little deeper in that. You've written and others have said that this is a gift to China. Could you explain why that is, what this gift looks like and what China gets out of it?
Well, I don't know if either of you have a subscription to the Khmer Times, but the headline this morning, you can look it up, is vital assistance. I'm not getting the exact headline right here, but it's sort of vital assistance. Beijing steps in with $4.4 million in demining assistance because of USAID foreign assistance pause. We have been making major efforts over the past couple of years to reset our relationship in Cambodia. Secretary Austin went last year. Administrator Power went last year. I was lucky enough to go with her. No illusions about the dynamics in Phnom Penh, but even a lot of history is written in the margins, and even if we could have gotten a little bit of progress in bringing Cambodia a little bit more onto our side, a little bit less access at Ream than Beijing wanted, that's strategically significant. We have now taken ourselves off of the playing field. We have demonstrated that the United States is not a reliable partner. We've allowed Beijing, the irony of allowing the PRC to appear to care more about the Cambodian people than we do, is just mind-blowing. And they are stepping into that breach, right? We are creating a vacuum. We're creating negative space. And we're seeing it all across the region over the past several weeks. I mean, it has been remarkable, although perhaps not, just how quickly Beijing has recognized that they have an opportunity here, and they're moving in to demonstrate that they're the better partner. And if we don't get ourselves back in the game, all of our rhetoric about how the United States should be the partner of choice and that we want to be the partner of choice will go to naught, because if you're not showing up, you're not really a partner.
So another accusation that's been leveled against USAID is that it funds disproportionately left-wing causes, and things that are rolled out as examples of this are, say, funding publications in other countries for LGBT causes, or things like this. How do you respond to these charges?
I mean, look, I think one of the interesting challenges that we all have in this day and age, and this is not just a USAID question, is, how do you respond to people simply spouting things that are untrue, right? What's the old saying about, a lie makes it around the world before the truth has a chance to get its shoes on? That's what we're dealing with here. I don't think there is any empirical or data-driven basis for making that accusation that USAID funds disproportionately left or woke causes. I mean, of course, every administration has different weights, different balance that it places on what it supports. But if you were to look at USAID, across, pick your starting point, from Bush to Obama to Trump to Biden, now back to Trump, I think you would see a remarkable balance in USAID's approach, in part because so much of what we do is directed by Congress. Again, for me, 90% of my funds and more was congressionally directed during a period in which both Democrats and Republicans had control of the House and the Senate. If we had been leaning heavily to the left, our Republican oversight committees, rightfully so, would have held us to account. If we were leaning heavily to the right, our Democratic members on the oversight committees would have held us to account. That dynamic drives USAID by and large to the center. And I would offer, just as one maybe small counterexample, for the first time this past year, USAID stood up a Office for Faith initiatives and laid out a strategy for engagement with faith groups. I mean, we've always, of course, helped to work with and fund a number of groups that have different religious and faith affiliations, but under the Biden administration, we made that a piece of the firmament and gave it an institutional home in the agency. That's not the sort of thing that one would expect, if everything were simply being pulled to the left. And so
what's interesting is Musk, when asked, isn't there anything that be saved? Why do you have to shut down everything? Said it was just an apple full of worms, with all worms. And he reached this conclusion. How do you think? I mean, less than 2 weeks, somehow he managed to go through the thousands of AID programs and came to this. Is there any basis for this?
I am not going to speculate on Elon Musk's brain and how he got to this conclusion. I will offer that, when the Trump administration originally announced its 90-day review of foreign assistance, my response, the stop order piece aside, which I think was problematic, But having a foreign assistance review so that you can understand what you're dealing with and make informed, mindful, intentional decisions, that makes perfect sense. Every administration does that. When I came in and assumed, my job, my first several months were filled with briefings so that I could actually understand, even though I had been doing work in this space from an oversight perspective in the Senate before I took this job. I needed to really, get in and understand what the programs were so that I could then make decisions about, okay, this makes sense. This makes less sense. We want to push this forward. Maybe we need to reconsider or rethink, in this area. There's a right way to do this and a wrong way to do this. I wish that we were doing this in the right way, because I think doing it in the right way with congressional engagement and support and buy-in, and in a bipartisan fashion, that would leave the United States stronger and better positioned. Instead, I'm really concerned that we are going to find ourselves, having hollowed out and decapitating an essential tool in the national security toolkit, and that is going to leave us worse off. It's going to create risk for the American people. It's going to have, a negative impact on American prosperity and American security, and that's not what we should be trying to do.
One other accusation that's been lodged against USAID is that it's a front for CIA operations. Does USAID have an historical relationship to the CIA? And if so, what is it like now?
I guess I would go back to, why President Kennedy stood up AID in 1961 was because there was a recognition that we needed to have a development agency and have development diplomats around the world who were beyond reproach of having any other affiliation or motivation. Because, look, I know my history. I know that there were times in the 1950s when the agency, for policy reasons that by and large, I might be supportive of, but the agency was doing work in ways that
Central Intelligence Agency, not from us.
the CIA was doing work in ways that created, misapprehensions in other countries and left us open to risk and criticism. And so that was part of the idea of standing up AID as its own thing, was to separate those worlds so that our development work could proceed and stand on its own 2 feet and in ways that would, because of the way in which we were pursuing it, separate from the intelligence community, separate from other parts of the national security apparatus, would have benefits for the United States and for American national security. And I think that the model worked. Now, when you talk about relationships, and how things like when we would participate in National Security Council meetings over the past several years, right? All of the elements of the U.S. government, including the intelligence community, State Department, Treasury, Commerce, right, are all gathered around that table. And so, of course, there are conversations where you're sharing views and perspectives at a policy level. But that's very, very different than operational engagement.
When I've talked to groups and you ask how much of the U.S. budget they think goes to foreign assistance, almost universally they say 10%. I don't know why that number sticks out. And then when you ask, what should it be? And they usually say 5%. And then when you inform them it's actually less than 1%, they go, oh, well, that's not so bad. But here we are claiming we're going to save $40 billion, which, Michael, is a drop in the federal budget, being less than 1%. And not only that, I believe a lot of that goes to buy U.S. goods and services. So could you talk about that connection between AID spending and the benefits to U.S. farmers and pharmaceutical companies and others?
Yeah, no, it is an excellent point. I mean, and some of the public opinion data out there actually shows that people think as much as 30% of our budget goes for foreign assistance. I mean that 10% number comes through much more frequently, but the error when people make it is much higher. Not lower. And you are exactly right. When people find out what the actual amount is, they actually think that it's either very, very reasonable or too low. Because the American people, by and large, do think that the United States, that America has a role to play in the world, and we have an obligation to other communities, other countries, to provide that sort of assistance and help that USAID does, in addition to providing it for self-interested reasons, because resilient societies help us. Strong partners help us. The example that I always like to give when you think about that return on investment for what that less than 1% of the budget gets us is the Republic of Korea, that 50 years ago had poverty rates that were below today's sub-Saharan Africa, thanks to the programming and assistance that USAID provided, obviously along with everything that the Korean people themselves provided. Right, we now have in the Republic of Korea a strong military partner, a strong economic partner, and a cultural juggernaut. For those of you that like to keep your Netflix queues filled up with Korean programming, right? I mean that is a pretty good return on investment. If you look at where the Republic of Korea was and what it was able to provide as a partner for the United States, 50 years ago and where it is, where it is today. And you are exactly right, Jim, that there of USAID's budget, hundreds of millions goes directly to U.S. farmers or U.S. companies and corporations that provide services. A number of members of Congress, this week have been pointing out to Secretary Rubio that there is $340 million worth of food assistance that is sitting and rotting in U.S. ports because of the stop work order and the foreign assistance pause. That is $340 million worth of food assistance that benefits our partners, obviously, when they receive it. But that $340 million goes into the pockets of U.S. farmers, right? And that is a small chunk of the benefit that flows directly to the U.S. economy and directly to American workers out of USAID's work. So that is another selfish argument for why this work is so important.
Well, Michael, I'm going to get you out of here on this exit question because I kind of want to give you the chance to talk about where you think this is going. Today is February 7th. As we're recording this, we're going to try to put this out early next week as a special, because this is such a fast-moving train that we don't want to get stale waiting for its normal turn in line. So as you see sort of the battle lines drawn between, say, the Doge over here and some of the forces that are looking at USAID and then its defenders, say, in Congress and other places, do you see a quick resolution to this, a favorable resolution? What's your best sense, just as of right this minute, understanding that nobody knows what's going to happen?
Yeah, no, it is a great question, and if you asked me that 2 days ago, I'd have a different answer than I have today, and probably 2 days from now, I'll have a different answer as well. My hope is that we can get back to a place where the State Department, the administration, the White House, and Congress can sit down and have a reasonable discussion about what foreign assistance reform needs to look like. And Jim, you had brought up the Australian and UK experiences earlier. I think there's a lot to be learned from that. And one of the lessons, does have to do with maintaining that operational and technical and service delivery expertise that our development diplomats have that our diplomats don't, right? Not through any fault of their own, but just that's not what they do. I would say that's is an important lesson learned from those other experiences. So I hope we can get to a place where we can have that reasonable discussion about, hey, if we're sitting down with a blank sheet of paper in 2025, trying to figure out what does U.S. foreign assistance need to look like as we contemplate PRC competition, as we contemplate this new era of great power competition. What do the institutions need to look like? What does the culture need to look like? What's the capacity and the functions that we want to maintain? I hope we can get there. I'm not at all confident, given our politics right now, that that's going to be possible. I'm deeply concerned that we are simply going to mix metaphors here. We're going to take ourselves off the field. There's going to be an own goal, and the only people that will be happy, will be in Beijing and Moscow, Tehran and elsewhere.
Well, let us hope that is not the outcome. We do want to give you a chance to talk a little bit about what you're doing now and where people can follow your work. We note that you've been writing for a website called justsecurity.org, where you have a new article out yesterday talking about U.S. Steel and what the Trump administration can do to help save that. Where else should people keep track of what you're doing?
Well, I am quite honestly, and today's appearance notwithstanding, I'm trying to do my own foreign assistance review for myself. And my plan when I walked out of my office on January 20th was to take a few weeks where I could rest, reflect, and make some thoughtful decisions about what my next act might look like and what would come next. I haven't entirely done that yet. I'm still hoping to. And I will definitely let you know, other than my, unburdening myself on just security. I will definitely let you know where you can find me as soon as I have figured out where I can find me.
All right, Michael Schiffer. Well, thank you very much for joining us. We hope to have you back again. And once again, our sponsor is Bauer Group Asia, a strategic advisory firm that specializes in the Indo-Pacific. Bauer Group applies unmatched expertise and experience to help clients navigate the world's most complex and dynamic markets. And of course, Jim Caruso is a senior advisor with Bauer Group. You could reach them at BauerGroupAsia.com. So Jim, this is, we don't usually kind of dive straight into hot domestic political issues, but somehow this foreign affairs issue has become a very hot topic.
Well, look, it's a key component of U.S. national power is our ability to give assistance to developing countries, both because it's the right thing to do morally, because it buys influence in governments and societies, and because it counteracts Beijing's huge investments in these same countries for the same power and influence. So by taking ourselves out of the field unilaterally and suddenly, we become, as Michael indicated, an unreliable partner when we've been pitching for ages that we are more reliable than Beijing, and just leaves the field to our adversaries for less than 1% of our national budget.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was concerned when he talked about the work they were doing around the EDCA sites in the Philippines, which of course are areas in which we do want to improve our posture, both for sort of national interest reasons, because those sites are so important to us, and for kind of public diplomacy reasons, because those sites can be very controversial in the Philippines. It is good to be able to show that Filipinos benefit from having a U.S. defense component there in that area. And of course, I also spent 3 years in Vietnam, where there has been for years and years the issue of cleaning up a lot of what happened there in Vietnam between the war and the Agent Orange and those kinds of things. USAID has been at the center of that. And that goes back to what extent do we have a moral responsibility? And I suppose you could say, look, they fought a war. That's on them. They could have not fought, and we could have, but but then of course you get back to the national interest piece. Now, I will say, I do think that to some degree, the cleanup of these things, I saw some gamesmanship from the Vietnamese government at times, where they were nervous about sort of advancing too far with the U.S. on a security front. So they would just sort of shift everything over and say, well, we need to deal with these other things first. We need to deal with the mines and the dioxin and all of these things. And to the point where we weren't really getting to the more pressing security matters, even though the health and safety and other kinds of matters that were associated with those things were very, very real. So I do think, our even our partners and allies know how to play some of this stuff. And that's part of the game, I guess.
Well, this is where it's a very legitimate point that our AID colleagues when I was at State would be very much focused on sort of the purity of the project without regard to some of the issues you bring up of we're being gamed, or having the ambassador having more control in the country of where investments should be made by AID. So that's all legitimate. But when Elon Musk took over Twitter, he didn't shut down Twitter while he reorganized.
Well, he did fire a whole bunch of people.
Pardon me?
He did fire a whole bunch of people very quickly.
He did, but he didn't stop operations.
Yeah.
Now, why would you do that with a government agency where people are going to die, people are going to get sick, and people are going to be angry? For what benefit? This is what I can't understand. And the idea that these AID has no nice places, they're not in Brussels, they're not in London, they are in the countries where they need a lot of help, less nice countries. So to accuse them of all these of being evil and corrupt, on what basis? It's so nasty. I don't understand why.
Well, I mean, some of it just, I think, probably comes back to the fact that our politics is nasty, and it's been nasty for a little while. I mean, and so once AID became a political football, nastiness was kind of maybe going to be baked in. I didn't expect it, but maybe I should have. But yeah, I mean, I really do. I agree that a lot of this is really sort of over the top and misplaced. Now, can I see a world, and I'm an optimist, I am an optimist, can I see a world in which this opportunity is used to sort of take care of some of these structural issues and then kind of refocus AID in a better way? I can see that world, but certainly not if we get sort of, if everything is all about invective and it's all about, it's not an apple with a worm in it. It's all worms and no apple. I think that's completely unhelpful. Just in your experience dealing with AID from the State Department side, how was that?
Well, as I said, it's very frustrating when you have no budget and they have this huge budget and they guard it. To say jealously is an understatement. They're going to invest in what they want to invest in, which is the way they were set up. So it's not an absolute tool of U.S. foreign policy. That's the way Congress wanted it. So I'm, as a State Department guy, I'm all for doing much more coordination. And every time there's an opportunity for some AID project, an embassy person's there from a policy standpoint to really drive the point home. Absolutely. And I remember a battle when I was in one country where I said, can you show me all the places AID has projects? So our ambassador goes to those places, he can mention the project and maybe visit. And they said, no, we don't have that information. That's with the contractors. And that blew my mind. So yeah, a lot, Michael kept saying a lot can be done to improve things. But, when a patient has a bad finger, you don't say, well, we're going to take off the head and see what happens now.
All right. Well, I tell you what, I'm going to tell you a story today. I don't have a great AID story, but I do have a pretty good humanitarian assistance story from my youth. I was a junior airman in the Philippines back when there was such a thing as Clark Air Base in the Philippines, and the big U.S. Air Force Base. And we would do things. And I honestly, again, I was 21 years old. I had no idea who funded this exactly. But there was money from somewhere where we could basically load up some buses with a bunch of volunteers like myself, a bunch of doctors, like local doctors from the Philippines, and then a few other sort of medical administrators and nurses and such from the medical sector there on base. And we would go out into some barrio and do medical services all day. And, so I would generally, it would be everything from vision to teeth to, immunizations, all that stuff. And for whatever reason, maybe I was a glutton for punishment, but I would volunteer for minor surgery. Now, they did not give me a scalpel, so don't worry. But it was really interesting to see. So there would be these crowds that would come, and how the thing was advertised around the barrio sort of drove who showed up. So you'd know if it was all about cyst removal, that somehow that was the thing. And there would be people who come in with really large, protruding cysts, and they'd take them out and they'd sew them up and all of these things. And it was fascinating kind of to be part of. But every once in a while, it would be advertised as the opportunity to get your adolescent son finally circumcised. So you can imagine what that crowd looked like.
And scared.
Yes. Now, the good news is anesthetic is provided. So this is an important opportunity for these young fellas because the alternative is not great.
Promise you didn't have the scalpel.
I did not have the scalpel.
Because you're a little shaky.
Now, I do remember one specific incident in which they were applying the anesthetic before the procedure. And the young fellow I'd say he was maybe a preteen boy. And he reacted in a particular way that got everybody's attention. And some of the doctors and such got the giggles. And one of the nurses, the American nurses, came over with a towel and threw it over the top so that they could preserve a little of the boy's dignity. But it was a really interesting experience. The whole thing altogether was very, one of those things throughout the whole thing. One of the really highlights of my tour was being part of those medical civic action programs. And I think that we did a lot to, get the surrounding communities at sort of happy with the fact that the United States had a base there. Because the United States was doing something, and I don't think it was very expensive, frankly. Again, there's a lot of volunteer stuff. There was some supplies and some gas for the buses and things like that. But it did a lot to sort of keep the political situation around the bases kind of in our favor.
Well, circumcisions will do that, I guess.
All right. On that note, we are going to say thank you for joining us. We want to thank our producer, as always, Ian Ellis Jones, and IEJ Media for putting this out. We want to thank our great sponsor, Bauer Group. You can find them once again at BauerGroupAsia.com. And of course, please like and subscribe to us at our YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/IP Podcast. If that's how you watch, that's all you got to do. It costs you nothing. All you got to do is click that little thumbs up button there and subscribe to us. Of course, if you're listening to us, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, please subscribe to us so that we can be in your feed whenever we put these out. And on X, you can follow us at Indo-Pac Podcast. On LinkedIn, you just search for our name. And finally, you can send us email. Tell us what you like, what you don't like, what you think we ought to talk about more. Indo-Pacific Podcast @gmail.com. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time on Why Should We Care About the Indo-Pacific?